We're going to discuss relocation. Relocation is one of the biggest programs in the Uniform Act, and we want to make sure that we have a basic understanding of the relocation process. And also, this presentation is for training purposes only, so we'll jump into the relocation portion of the training at this point. Relocation for many property owners can be very stressful. And if you just think about it from, as you know, if you put yourself in the position of that property owner and you go to a meeting one night, and when you attend that meeting, you see that they got a red dot on your house, and the agents that are at the meeting are telling you that the Department of Transportation is going to buy your house. Well, some people, and that's most people, they love their houses and they love where they live at, and sometimes they don't want to be forced to move if they, have no desire to move. So relocation can be very stressful for the property owner. But I want to reassure you that is one of the most fulfilling things that we do as an agency when we relocate people to another location. And there are certain things that you have to do in relocation as far as in the pre-acquisition phase, and that is relocation interviews. And you have to stress to the owners that the information that they give you needs to be accurate and as up to date as it can be. And what the interview does, it allows the agents to start the process of finding comparable rentals or comparable housing or whatever the need may be. And also for businesses, moving estimates have to be prepared. And the moving estimates have to be prepared in order to make sure that, and we'll discuss this more as we get into the presentation, will be prepared to make sure that the owners can be moved from one place to another one. And when we are dealing with relocation, the agents in Atlanta, which work in the relocation section, they need a copy of the appraisal and they need a copy of the 532 in order to prepare the packages that you and I as agents will need in order to go out and to relocate someone from one place to another one. And relocation documents, they'll do 60 days from the project assignment. So we want to make sure that we get those relocation documents in as quick as possible, because the thing about relocation is that it is guided by certain time frames that are regulated. And you have to give owners a certain amount of time to do each thing that they have to do in this process. So the key to relocation is, in order to meet your schedule and to make sure that things are moving forward, is that we have to make sure that we are getting in the documents, and when you're doing your appraisal report, you want to make sure that those relocation appraisal reports are put in the front and that you get them back as soon as possible, so that, and you want to get those interviews done and all those different things that we need in order to start the relocation process. So that's very important. And we had talked about interviews, and the attachments must be accurate. So that's one thing you want to stress, is that the information that you get, you know, whatever the owner tells you, you want to make sure that that information is accurate, so that we can make sure that they are entitled to all the benefits that are due to them. A very important thing is that the relocation, when you start to negotiate for relocation, make sure that you keep a separate negotiation record, and make sure you keep a copy of all the documents. And this simply means that the relocation has to have their own separate negotiation records. A lot of times there are a lot of claim forms, so you have to be sure that you keep up with all those claim forms, and make sure that you take time when you are negotiating a relocation property to take the brochure and to discuss the brochure with the property owner. Also, take the time to take each one of those documents and claim forms that you are giving the property owner. Make sure you take the time to discuss each one of those documents and what their purpose are. And you also want to have a closeout checklist once all benefits have been filed. And another thing that that closeout checklist does, it helps us to remember all the documents that we need. And so it's good to put that in your file in the beginning of your project. So therefore, when you're going through the relocation process with your owner, you don't forget to give them certain things, or to explain certain things, or to do certain things. And it's very important that you keep a line of communication open with the property owner. And also, I just want to stress too, when we are dealing with relocation, even if it goes to condemnation, make sure that you keep a working relationship with the owner, because they still have to relocate even if it goes to condemnation. So we still have to go through that process, even if the property owner has to go to litigation. And as we just discussed, when you make the initial contact with the owner, you want to do an overview of the offer and an explanation of the brochure. And the brochure explains their rights. So you want to just take the time to sit there with them and to discuss all those items in the brochure that pertains to them and their property. You want to make sure that they have a good understanding of what their benefits are, what their rights are, and just to make sure that you explain everything to them clearly. You also want to explain to them concerning possession, that they have 90 days from the availability of relocation assistance letter, or they have 60 days from the notice of vacate or closing, whichever one is longer. So you want to make sure that the property owners have a proper understanding of a possession, how it works. So and it's good to just take the time to explain that to them when you first make the offer, so that once you close, there are no surprises. Because I can just imagine a property owner, he closes, he's sitting there, he's thinking everything cool, and you say, now you understand you got 60 days. And he says, 60 days? I can't move in 60 days. And so you're putting the property owner on a hardship. But if he knows that from Jump Street, from the very beginning of your initial contact with them, that they have so many days and so many days to do this and so many days to do that. And that's why we was talking about earlier, that's why it's so important to make sure that all those relocation things are done in the before. If your let date is approaching and you have not made that relocation offer, then you could jeopardize the let date, because you have to give them, you can't say, well, you're going to have to be out in 30 days. You can't do that. You can't say, oh, the let date is approaching, so you got to get out. You can't do that. They're going to be entitled to those 90 days or 60 days or however many days that they're that they are supposed to have. So just make sure that when you're dealing with relocation properties that you are aware of the schedule, and to make sure that you do those things that need to be done, so we won't have a timeline issue when we are trying to finish up with the relocation. And also, even with relocation, you don't want to take up all the time, because property management needs some time also to remove the structure. So we want to keep in mind all of those things. So the best practice is to make sure that you start the relocation process early, which means you get your interviews done, you get your moving estimates done, you get the appraisal done, and you get all those things done in the beginning of the project. So that would give you time to work through all of the issues you may have to go through in order to get the property owner from one place to another one. Because sometimes property owners would like to build. And if they would like to build, that can take time. So if you start in enough time, then we could work through all those issues, and it can be a good experience for the property owner and a good experience for the department. But what we don't want to do is to have them under duress, and the department feeling under duress, and nobody's happy. So we just want to make sure that we are moving forward with relocation. Always be mindful when dealing with relocation of your schedule. Be very mindful of your schedule, because it's very important. Because these dates that we're talking about, we talked about the Uniform Act in the beginning, where these dates are given to us by the Uniform Act, by the law. So by law, this has to be followed, and you can't deviate from them dates. And also, when making an offer to an owner for relocation, there has to be comparable housing, has to be available when you make that offer. And it has to be decent, safe, and sanitary. It has to be functional equivalent. It has to be basically the same size and available. And the relocation makes sure that you have to have enough bedrooms, because in some houses, you might have a girl and a boy sleeping in the same bedroom as brother and sister. But when you go into the relocation program says they have to be separate. So the boy has to have a bedroom, the girl has to have a bedroom. So that means when they say functional equivalent, that means it might have to be have more bedrooms, or it has to be a larger size in order to meet the needs of that family. And most importantly, it means it has to be decent, safe, and sanitary. And the things that are decent, safe, and sanitary means it has to have cold and hot water, sanitary sewer, septic tank. The doors on the bathroom have to lock. It has to be able to heat. The house has to be able to heat to at least 70 degrees. There's a lot of rules that make sure that all these things are happening for decent, safe, and sanitary. And we have to go out and check and make sure that these houses are decent, safe, and sanitary. So we're going to talk about replacement housing payments just for just a few minutes. Replacement housing is very important. And basically what replacement housing does is that it makes sure that when the owner is moving from one location to another location, they're either in the same position they were before they moved or in a better position. And what the replacement housing payment does, and we'll just keep it very simple, if they live in a house now that is worth $100,000, then if the new house is $125,000, which is the replacement housing, then they will be eligible for a replacement housing payment of $25,000 to make up that difference. And all last resort is more than $31,000. So what that simply means is that if you have housing that goes into last resort, then the agency has a way to still compensate you, even though that the replacement housing payment may exceed that amount. And that's what the cost of comparable housing is, less the FMV equals the comparable housing difference. And closing costs, that is very important because closing costs can run into the thousands of dollars, and they have to be reasonable and necessary. Now, one thing that I want to stress to anyone who's an agent that's working in relocation, make sure that before you tell the property owner how much the department will pay in closing costs, that you have ran it through the relocation section and got pre-approval to make sure that everything that we're talking about is going to be everything that's listed is going to be paid for. And if there are some things that are not going to be paid for, let's find that out before we get to the closing so we can talk to the property owner and we can work all those issues out to make sure that when they arrive at the closing, there are no questions about what's going on. Sometimes property owners will say that my house is worth more than you offering me. They could say, well, we use an example of the $100,000 for the housing, and they could say, well, my house is worth $110,000. Well, what that does, it reduces dollar for dollar when counter offered to the FMV. So if the value of the house goes up, then the value of the replacement housing is going to come down. So it's a dollar for dollar, up and down. So the replacement housing is pretty much a set value. There are some cases when we have what we call a carve-out. And I think that discussing the carve-out is probably a little advanced for this presentation. So what I would suggest, if you have a situation with a carve-out, that you would talk to a senior right-of-way agent or acquisition manager or team manager in order to discuss carve-outs and how they work. And also closings. Make sure that that you attend the closing. And what you want to do to attend the closing is that you need to be there in case there are any questions that might come up. And that way you can address those questions that may or may not come up. And also, it gives the property owner a little more comfort, if you would, to have a familiar face there that has been working with them through this process. And like I had stated before, in some cases, relocation can be very stressful for a property owner. So we want to keep them in mind when we are working through relocation, that this can be a stressful time for a property owner to move from one location to another one. But for the agent, when you are successful in moving them from one location to another one, it can be very fulfilling and a very good thing. So we just want to keep those things in mind when we're dealing with the property owner. And here we just talk about a carve out just a little bit. And like we just discussed, it's better that you discuss that with a more senior agent and also discuss it with your team leader or acquisition manager. But I would just mention it's a major attribute of the displacement, such as a pool or a workshop. And that's basically saying that when we go out and we find comparable sales and comparable housing for that relocation, is that we are not considering the pool or workshops. So they are considered a carve out. And so they will not actually be a part of the fair market value for the relocation. So we want to make sure that we have a good understanding of what a carve out is. And so a carve out is something that we carved out or we took out of the equation when we was looking for comparable sales or replacement housing for a pool or a workshop. Just say, for instance, you had a pool, a property owner had a pool in the before. When we go out and we start looking for comparables, we will not look for other houses that have pools. We will look at houses that are comparable to the house that they are in now. The same thing with workshops and certain other items. We won't go and try to find another house that has a standalone garage with 3 bays. It would be considered a carve out. And when dealing with carve outs, like I have already stated, talk to someone who's a senior agent who has a better understanding of carve outs. And the cost of FMV relocation base equals RHP. And the RHP is replacement housing payment. So that's the cost of the comparable. Let's talk about rent supplements for just a minute. Rent supplements are based on 42 monthly payments. And a lump sum can be paid for all payments. And a last resort is above $7,200. And it can also be used as a down payment option, which I will talk about that for just a few minutes. And the eligible down payment applies to the equity of the purchase and not to exceed the max tabulated rent of the supplemental payment. Now, basically the way that rent supplement works is that you have a rent that you are paying as an owner. And say we move as a tenant, excuse me, and we move you to another location. And that location, say there's a $200 rent differential. Well, once you move, you can receive 42 monthly payments to supplement that rent to make sure that you can continue to rent where you are, and it will provide you to be able to continue to live there because you're receiving that rent supplement. But just say, for instance, you say to yourself, I've been renting for 10 years. I want to own a house. And in a lot of cases, the problem that most owners have I mean, people that want to buy houses have, is that they can't come up with the initial funds in order to buy a house. You know, you have to have so much to go down on the house. You have to have so much for closing costs. Well, what the rent supplement does, it allows you to be able to do that down payment option. Say if you had to pay 10% down or 20% down, then what the rent supplement can be used for, it could be used for that down payment. And it says the eligible down payment applied to the equity of the purchase. So you have to use the rent supplement for the down payment. But the thing about the down payment is that if your rent supplement is $15,000, then the down payment that the department is going to give you, it cannot exceed the max tabulated rent supplement payment. So in other words, if your supplement is $15,000 and you want to use it for a down payment, and say that your down payment is $17,000, the most that the department or the agency would give you is $15,000, because it cannot exceed the max of tabulated rent. So when you're dealing with tenants, it's important that you get accurate information, because the information that they give you is going to have a lot to do with how their rent supplement is calculated. And also, we want to make sure that we take the time to explain to them what all their benefits are, including the down payment option, because that can help a lot of people who are not homeowners now become homeowners. Because like I was saying before, sometimes it's hard to come up with that initial cash for some people. And if you could just come up with that initial cash, then you could move into another home because you have that cash. And the rent supplement can help with that in some cases. Now we're going to talk about residential moving methods. And there are three methods. You got method A, which is the fixed rate, method B, which is actual cost, and method C, which is self-move. All three of these are good methods. Method A is based on a room count, which they would determine that it will cost X amount of dollars to move you from this location to this location. Method B is actual cost. If you actually call a moving company to move you, then that cost would be the actual cost of what it takes to move. And then method C, which is, to me, is the one is least used, is the self-move, where you keep receipts and keep up with everything that it costs to move from one location to the other location. But the important thing to remember about method C is that method C cannot exceed the cost of method B, which is actual move, because we know how much our actual move would be. Our actual move would be so many dollars, where the moving company would charge you a certain amount to move you. Well, then the self-move cannot exceed what a moving company would charge to move you from one location to another one. And that's very important, very important. Now, we're just going to talk for just a few minutes about businesses, farms, and nonprofits moving methods. And you got method A, which is self-move. You got method B, which is actual cost. And the method A is equivalent to what we talk about method A in the residential move, which would be at a fixed rate, where a moving estimate would be provided and say that it would cost this much money to move from this location to that location. Method B is the same thing. It's the actual cost, where it takes to move from one location to another location. And then method C is a self move, and you can do in lieu of method A and method B. And there are certain documents that you have to turn in and to provide, which the brochure goes into a lot of detail. We won't take the time to go through that in this class, but the in lieu of is explained in detail in the brochure. And make sure that when you're talking to these property owners, that you go through each one of these methods line by line to make sure that they understand all their benefits. And also you have moving incidentals, you have search and expense, which can be maxed out at $2,500. And you also have reestablishment, which maxes out at $25,000. And what reestablishment is that if you move to another location and you have a building there that needs certain things done to it to get it back to where your previous business was, we will pay up to $25,000 to reestablish it. Reestablishment cannot be used to buy a building, but it can be used to reestablish a business. And not only that, there are a lot of things that it will pay for. And that's another thing that the brochure, it has a list of things that reestablishment will do, and it does. So it's very important when you're talking to the property owner to take that brochure and to go through those things step by step with them, to say, okay, this is what reestablishment is. This is what it'll pay for. This is what it would do. And if the owner has a question about reestablishment, and it doesn't necessarily, and the brochure does not cover it, and you're unsure about it, do not make a statement and say, yeah, we can do it. Make sure that you run those things through the relocation section to make sure that they are eligible, or they may not be eligible. So just make sure that you run those things by relocation, because there are some things that reestablishment won't cover. And there are a lot of things it may not be listed that it may still cover. But the only way we can make sure is that if you are not sure that it's covered, make sure that you run it by someone in the relocation section to make sure that they are eligible for those benefits. The next thing is that we run into what we call consequential displacees, and we also have 100% damages to the improvement. And we're gonna just, for a few minutes, talk about what this means and why these things are. Number one, a consequential displacee is one that the property has been rendered in such a use that they can stay there, but it might be hard to stay there, or something's going on where it just, and what the department does in the case with consequential displacees, they give the property owner the right to decide whether or not they want to stay. And they have until 6 months to after the project is completed to decide whether or not they want to go. Most people decide once construction has started, because they can see, this is just too close, I can't do it, or I can't, get to a property like this, it's just not working. And at that point, if they decide that they want to move, then they have the option to move. There are other instances where the property, we are not acquiring the improvement to the property, but we are taking away the things that cause that property to be decent, safe, and sanitary, such as we could be taking the well, or we could be taking the septic tank, or something like that. And the property owner has nowhere to put another well, has nowhere to put another septic tank, then this property will be considered a relocation instead of consequential, because it has to be decent. You remember we talked about earlier, decent, safe, and sanitary. It has to be decent, safe, and sanitary. So these improvements will be damaged 100%, and they will be considered a full relocation, which means that we would treat them as a relocation, and they will have to, they don't have a choice, they will have to move from the residence. So that's the difference, the basic difference between a consequential displacee and when an improvement that is no longer decent, safe, and sanitary. So it's important to understand those differences and how to handle them, because if the house can still be there and somebody can say, well, I still want to live here. If you don't have a septic tank, we can't allow you to stay there. If you don't have running water, we can't allow you to stay there. So that residence becomes a full relocation. And as we was talking about the timeline. So these are some of the paperwork and things that need to be given to the property owner to make sure that everything keeps moving in a timely fashion. Number one, the availability letter of relocation benefits. And that's another thing. When you give them the availability letter of relocation benefits, you want to make sure that you explain that letter and what it means. And then that's when you go over the brochure. You know, we talked a lot about that brochure. What happens when your property is needed for a transportation property? So you take that brochure and you go over with that property owner all their benefits. That is so, I can't stress to you enough how very important it is to make sure that you go over all those benefits. The next thing is that those claim forms and the timeliness of those claim forms, they have to be turned in by a certain time, and you want to make sure that you talk to the property owner about those claim forms, and to make sure that they understand the timeliness of those claim forms, to make sure they understand how long they have before they have to turn those claim forms in. Because from the time the offer is made, there are certain dates that have to be met, and if the claims are not turned in within those timelines, then they could forfeit their benefits. So you want to make sure that they understand the claim forms and the timelines. If somebody wants to appeal an offer, and what I mean about appeal the offer, I'm talking about appeal the relocation offer. They're saying that, you know, this is just not right. The replacement housing, any of this stuff is not right. You have to give them the right to appeal. But you want to make sure that they understand that you have only so long to appeal, and the timeliness of it. And we want to make sure that the timelines for consequential displacee, that they have 6 months after the project is built. They can't come back 2 years later and say, hey, I want to move, because the timeline, they have missed the time frame. And if they have missed the time frame, then they're no longer eligible for those benefits. So please take the time to go over the claim forms, to explain the timelines, and to make sure that the property owner has a proper understanding of what they are.